Hi, I'm Richard Weiss, former president of the Explorers Club, and I'd like to welcome you to the Explorers Club 50 lecture series. If you're new to the club and to the lecture series, I'd like to welcome you and tell you a little about ourselves and also about the Explorers Club 50. First of all, the Explorers Club was established in 1904. At that time, by a bunch of guys trying to get to the North and South Pole. And since that time, our members have covered just about every corner of the earth. In fact, when you walk into the lobby of our historic headquarters on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, there is a plaque on the wall that perhaps summarizes it best. Our members have been the first to step foot on the North Pole, first on the South Pole, first to stand upon Mount Everest, the highest point, the first to go to the lowest point in the ocean, and also our members were the first to go to the moon. Other notable explorers have been Theodore Roosevelt and Jane Goodall, and just about every notable explorer of the 21st century. Now about the Explorers Club 50. The slogan is 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. And I'll give you a little genesis of how that started. Last spring, during the beginning of the pandemic, one of our members said to me, "You've got to check out this performance or this video called Earthrise by a young poet named Amanda Gorman." I watched it, and it was about the Apollo 8 mission, which were our members. And I was blown away by how she described Earth, the environment, and the fragility of our planet. We started a short correspondence and became pen pals. She became a member. But I also thought, how many other Amanda Gormans are out there in the world? In fact, when I got together with the chair of this program, Joe Rohde, who you'll be meeting in just a few minutes, we got together and we said, how do we want to describe exploration in the future? And if we're truly a global exploration society, then our club has to represent the world as we see it. And not just in terms of how people look, but also how people describe the earth and the sky and just about everything in science. So, how did we choose the EC50 honorees? 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. The first thing Joe Rohde said to me was that if you take a problem and you approach it with the same people, you are always going to get the same type of results. So he immediately said, we wanted as diverse a judging panel, people who could look at the world through a different narrative and lens and be able to come together with some sort of conclusion. So he put together a group that was from all over the world. The next thing we had to do is have our membership give us people that they have met along the way that were doing incredible things that maybe weren't recognized for their work. We got about 450 nominations. And I have to tell you, they were pretty amazing. We could have gotten an EC 200 out of it. We came out with our top 50 honorees, and the result was nothing less than spectacular. We have people covering all sectors of disciplines from space to paleontology, oceanography. We have Inuit, Native Americans, Sri Lankans, Indians, Africans, and just across the border. But in the meantime, I want you to sit back and enjoy some good old-fashioned storytelling.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this very special EC50 Wavemakers discussion. Not only are each one of these incredible explorers an all-women group, which let's celebrate that, but each one of them are doing dynamic, innovative work within the ocean space and really working with technology and incorporation of all different stakeholders from this incredibly inclusive new way of advancing their work. And I think that on top of that, looking at things through this system approach, as each one of them are doing, has the opportunity of being able to really scale out the impact that they have. So welcome to the Wavemakers episode and enjoy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Hazelwood,
And I'm Amber Sparks.
and we are co-founders of Blue Latitudes, a women-owned marine environmental consulting firm. And we're also marine conservation biologists, whose purpose is to reef the world's oil platforms into permanent artificial reef structures. Around the world, there are thousands of offshore oil and gas platforms in almost every single ocean on the planet. And as we begin to push for offshore renewable resources and away from oil and gas resources, many of these platform structures will need to be decommissioned or completely removed from the seafloor. However, there is a unique alternative. This alternative involves turning these oil platforms into permanent artificial reef structures. And we've been doing this for over 30 years. In fact, in the Gulf of Mexico, more than 600 offshore oil platforms have been turned into permanent artificial reefs. And we also see examples internationally in areas such as Thailand and Brunei.
So you might be wondering why we would want to do this. Well, these platforms have been studied around the world, and they've been found to be some of the most productive habitats on the planet, more productive than coral reefs or mangroves. And the secret really lies in the structure itself, ranging from seafloor to sea surface. These platforms create a lot of real estate and have complex structure that has nooks and crannies for marine life to develop and thrive. Here in California, we see scallops, anemones, schools of jack mackerel, and other local species that nest and make their permanent home on these platforms. But decommissioning can be not only technically challenging, it also has impacts to safety, health, and the environment. Traditionally, through decommissioning, the oil wells are sealed and capped, and the oil companies retain liability for those wells in perpetuity. So should there ever be a spill or a leak, they're always responsible. And then the structure is completely removed from the seafloor. This is traditional complete removal of a platform. However, the alternative of rigs to reef would allow an oil company to modify the structure so that it can continue to support life as an artificial reef. Through a rigs to reef alternative, the oil wells are sealed and capped in the exact same way, and the top side, or what you would see from your beach chair, is removed. And then this platform jacket that's been housing marine life is either toppled on its side, towed to an area of ecosystem need, or the upper 80 feet can be removed to allow for ships to safely draft over, and that upper portion can either be placed next to the standing structure or taken on shore. All of these different reefing approaches seek to conserve habitat on these platforms and maintain their integrity as artificial reefs. On average, they can conserve up to 6 acres per structure. In addition to those environmental benefits, there's also significant economic incentives to reef a platform. In areas like California, if 23 of our 27 platforms were to be reefed, there'd be approximately $1 billion in saved costs. Now, with a rigs to reef law, that cost savings doesn't remain only with the oil company. Rather, approximately 80% goes back to the state into an endowment for marine preservation and conservation. That means that approximately $800 million would come back to the state to fund Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as other state-run conservation initiatives.
Now, while offshore oil and gas platforms may be on their way out, we know what's coming to many coasts along the United States and internationally: offshore wind. And if you look at an offshore wind turbine structure, you'll notice that it looks very similar to an offshore oil and gas platform, albeit the energy that's produced is much, much cleaner. Now, this video was collected off the coast of Block Island, where they've installed several offshore wind turbines. And you'll notice in this video that marine life has begun to be attracted to and produce on these offshore wind turbine structures. And our hope is that you'll start to think about these structures a little bit differently, not just bird killers or blights on our horizons, but potential thriving artificial reef sites.
Blue Latitudes is a women-owned marine environmental consulting firm. Emily and I met in graduate school at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where we started Blue Latitudes and also joined the Explorers Club. Since that time, we've worked in over 4 countries and conserved over 24 acres of habitat on offshore oil and gas platforms in many different oceans. You can find us and follow us on social media as well as our website. Feel free to reach out to us via email. Thank you.
I've been fishing for conch about 25 years. Conch is very important for my livelihood. That's the way I feed my family. I send my kids to school and stuff, so it's very important to me as a person, yeah.
In the Bahamas, queen conch are economically, ecologically, and culturally important. But despite the clear importance, there are many challenges facing the fishery.
In general, across the Caribbean, it's a similar story wherever you go. Queen conch populations are declining.
It's really been a big change because I remember like years ago, like boats they could go out and come back in with, tremendous conchs. Now they can't find a conch, just like the conchs just moving out further and further from us. We really need it.
At the Nature Conservancy, we believe in working with fishermen and communities in order to improve the sustainability of queen conch in the Bahamas.
So the project is to visit a number of fishermen in different parts of the Bahamas and show them how to do the research on the queen conch and determine what may be the best proxy indicator of maturity by measuring multiple different parameters.
A tool that the Nature Conservancy has developed is FishPath to support management and decision making in fisheries that don't have a lot of data. And this is the case for the Bahamas. So we have been working with the Department of Marine Resources, and one of the options that's come up is getting a better sense of how lip thickness is associated with the maturity of conch.
The Nature Conservancy is here in response to what we've been hearing from the community.
You can tell as well the difference in the microscope between one that hasn't developed enough to spawn and one that has already spawned, just by the kinds of cells that you see.
We want nature to thrive. We also want people in our communities who are depending on the environment to thrive as well. We think it's important to work on this because of the economic importance, because of the social impact, as well as the cultural impact to the fishermen, but also to the country at large.
I came up in the field from a little boy and I just love to swim. I just love the water. I love being with my father. I'm a fisherman.
Often fishermen come to these engagements with a bit of skepticism, but by hands-on engagement, we had groups of fishermen that were excited and fully participated in the process. These engagements give fishermen and communities an opportunity to see how scientific research is conducted and be a part of that process. By the end, fishermen are asking for more information and how they can further be involved in research.
I'm not just here to maybe share some knowledge that I have about conch, but I'm also here to learn as much as I can from you all about the situation with conch here.
Knowledge is power. A lot of people want power, but they don't want to get the knowledge. I think what you're all doing is real helpful for us to give us knowledge. Because I learned something from this meeting today. I learned a lot.
After spawning, you might think
The crux of the issue here is that there are not enough mature conch staying in the water to reproduce and produce enough offspring to sustain the fishery into the future. Fishers around the region, they all know there's a problem. They all know that the conch are getting smaller and more scarce. So we need to understand what are the appropriate management rules to have in different areas.
In this case, it's a female, so we're going to be looking to see if she has eggs within her. If she has eggs within her, then that indicates to us that she is mature.
With the decline in the queen conch, it's concerning me. We seriously need to look at how can we address this concern. We have to address it now. And so we can't wait till tomorrow. We have to address it today.
first time ever, we have people coming and trying to help the country deal with the conch problem, because today it really like opened up my eyes, that help is on the way now.
We hope that by conducting these engagements, the Bahamas can be an example of how communities, researchers, and government can come together to work towards sustainable fisheries, not only here in the Bahamas, but around the world.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jessica Sandoval, and I'm honored to be a part of the Explorers 50 program as a Wavemaker. I work as an ocean explorer and technologist, with my sights set on the deep sea. I'm fascinated by venturing to the depths of the ocean that in many cases have never been explored or even seen by the human eye. One reason for this is that the majority of the ocean is very deep. Rather, 92% of the sea floor resides at least 200 meters of depth or deeper. Or extending from this, 82% of the sea floor resides between 2,000 and 6,000 meters depth. So that's astoundingly deep. And that also means we're dealing with high pressures and no light. And yet there's a whole world down there to explore that we would otherwise miss. And it's full of biological, geological, and archaeological wonders. By not knowing what's in the deep sea, by not exploring it, we cannot effectively manage or conserve it. But the deep ocean is also highly interconnected, although it might not seem like it, with what's going on with us up here on the surface. So this has implications for our fisheries and our climate, for instance. But like I said, the deep ocean is difficult to access and requires highly specialized technology for us to venture that deep. So that's where I come in. So let's venture out to sea together for a brief moment, if you will. So this footage is of us leaving port in Honolulu aboard the EV Nautilus. I work as a pilot of remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. So this is a type of deep-sea robot that we use to dive to the deep depths of the ocean. And these ROVs can withstand very high pressures, collect samples, and can also be used to fly along the seafloor. And this orchestration of the deep-sea robots is all orchestrated from the control van. So much like you see here, this is really a logistical dance, if you will, of pilots, navigators, scientists, engineers, and ship's crew. So this is a highly involved process to explore the deep ocean. But the result is something that's truly phenomenal. In many cases, we are casting light onto the sea floor for the first time. So my work as a pilot has allowed me to explore incredible seascapes. And it seems almost like an alien planet here on Earth. So this includes venturing into incredibly biodiverse communities and seeing such strange beauties such as this glass sponge that you see here. But there's also an incredible amount of room for innovation in the technology that we use to get to the deep ocean. And this also excites me. So my work out in the field with deep sea robotics inspires the work that I do on land when I'm not on the water. As an engineer, I love to design and tinker to create new and transformative technologies. Particularly, the creatures that I see in the ocean are also true forms of inspiration for the technology that I've developed. As an example, I worked on fish-inspired underwater adhesives. And so this is a clingfish, and this is a type of fish that is, as I said, adhesive. From these adhesives, I worked to tailor them for underwater soft grippers, which I use to delicately grip objects underwater. We recently transferred this technology from the field into the surgical room, tweaking the grippers for use as medical devices. I'm also incredibly excited to develop low-cost deep-sea technology, moving away from this multi-million-dollar approach to deep-sea exploration. So on land, I work as a sensors and systems lead engineer for the Ocean Discovery League, which is a nonprofit aimed at lowering the barriers to ocean exploration, whether it be financial or technical barriers. One example is our camera and sensor system shown here that can dive to 1,500 meters while costing less than $700. So translating the very expensive, although very fun and exciting technology that I use out at sea into a low-cost, low-logistics system will hopefully help to expand access to the deep ocean for communities across the globe. Lastly, the very experience of being out at sea, of being hundreds of miles from shore, is an experience that I wish to convey to a broader audience, especially to children. At sea, we see these dreamy sunsets and wide open ocean, and that inspires me. I turn this wonder into poetry. I write children's books with deep sea inspired poetry and themes to capture the imaginations of the readers so that they too will feel inspired to explore the deep ocean. I hope through my story here to be the face of change for what it means to be an ocean explorer. There are very few female pilots in my industry, let alone very few Latina pilots. I hope to inspire young women from a diverse set of backgrounds to seek adventure in the ocean, for them to be the next wave of ocean-going adventurers and tinkerers, so that we together can change the notion of what it means to be an ocean explorer. Thank you.
This conversation, I can't tell you how excited I am to have this with these incredible, incredible explorers, scientists, technologists, and women of the Explorers Club. This one, I think, when we think about what exploration is and where we are in the world today, things are changing and they're changing dynamically. So there's something about this particular group that I think really speaks to the direction that exploration is going in. And one thing that I wanted to share was I was thinking about Wavemakers and really what that means and represents. And in physics, mathematics, and other related fields, a wave is defined as a disturbance that travels in all directions through the medium and carries energy from one point to another without the transfer of particles of that medium. And there's something about that definition that really highlights, I think, what each one of these incredibly innovative explorers are really doing and how they're impacting the future of exploration. So let's dive in a little bit and get the conversation started. Natalie, I would love to start with you and your incredible work because I think it really sets the tone for the discussion. As an ocean advocate that's really specializing in fisheries, and specifically the commercial viability of the lionfish. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you've learned in your work and how this sort of reciprocal approach has really led to more effective policy creation.
In exploration, we also often think of explorers setting out into the unknown, looking for information, finding answers, or finding, new inspiration. And when it comes to research and the policy making that we're seeing globally around the world, we're seeing a trend in not just exploring and finding those answers, but working with local communities and those that are dependent on the policy or that will be impacted by the policies that are changing our world today, and bringing them into the fold and into that decision-making process to better inform exploration and research around the world. And that bringing into the fold communities and stakeholders is making our research and our exploration that much more successful and rich. Because at the end of the day, you want policies that are impacting your world and your environment in a positive way. And you don't want just paper policies. And when you work with those communities, for example, in fisheries, we talk about lionfish, right? And look at a viability of a commercial lionfish fishery. when you, instead of just going to a community and asking questions or telling them, but when you involve them in the decision-making process, you're going to have policies that are more likely to be viable and implemented and a success than just what we would call paper policy, where it looks good on paper, you think you're making a difference, but you're really not seeing that impact. And if we really want to see this change globally across our world in conservation, for example, we need to see the success not just on the paper, but we need to see it. And including our communities in that process is really the key to doing that, Brandy.
You bring up something really, really important, Natalie, and I think in this trend of taking it off paper and really sort of the evolution of exploration as not being somewhere where you go, but instead really this enriching by bringing the local communities in. I think that's so important for making sure that, you know, we're really making things that are effective and keeping it off paper. How is it that you're seeing these mechanisms for taking things off paper and really ensuring that better cohesion between stakeholders? How are you seeing that as being something that can be scaled out outside of your direct work and potentially into other industries?
Take anything you want to change, for example, or anything you want to improve, right? It could be any industry out, not fisheries. If we look at farming, if we talk about farmers, even if we're just looking at maybe something more on the social impact, inner city, for example, if you're wanting to improve or address an issue within any arena, you really need to hear the authentic voice of those in which you are impacting. And so one way to do that is to directly go to those involved. A lot of times we do a lot of, surveying and a lot of like third-party data building, because it's what's oftentimes most accessible, but you really need true data, and you need to actually go to those communities, and you need to go to those stakeholders that you're trying to reach. And that takes a lot of one-on-one voices sometimes to really help inform what you're trying to change. So I'm always really encouraging those to actually get on the ground and go speak to people one-on-one. Maybe not, it's not a literature review. It's not something that, you don't quote a literature review. You need to actually speak with real people on the ground. So that's my suggestion. And also we're in a world now where information is so fast, but you really need a ground truth. And you need to get on the ground and really speak to people one-on-one. And also with information really coming at you so fast, things are changing. So you can't use information from even 6 months ago or a year ago. Our lives are changing. COVID has changed so much. So it's really trying to get on the ground and really listen to people and the needs of people. I often find that when you find the need of a stakeholder, you often find the solution. So finding the needs, and in that you find the solution.
Well, Natalie, we're definitely going to come back to you because there's a lot more questions that I have, and there's some interesting interconnectivities between everyone. But you set it up perfectly too, in terms of really listening and understanding the needs of different stakeholders. So at this point, I think building on this idea of bridge building, I want to shift to Emily Hazelwood and Amber Sparks. You're both the founders of Blue Latitudes, LLC, a woman-owned consulting firm, really working to find sustainable solutions at that intersection of industry and the environment. And so you're really talking about a different level of connectivity between stakeholders. They're really specifically working on bringing together environmental issues and economic issues and planning for the offshore industry. So Emily, Amber, let's dive in really quick. Emily, with you first, I think, because I want you both to be able to speak to this. As a marine conservation biologist, I want to know a little bit more about the formation of what inspired this Rigs to Reef program, and where are you with it now?
Sure. Well, after I graduated from college, I had the opportunity to work on the BP oil spill as a field technician. And that was my first time ever seeing an oil platform. It was the first time I'd ever seen such a significant environmental disaster, and spending time working in the Gulf with different communities and the fishermen. And actually witnessing that environmental damage firsthand really shaped the direction I wanted to take my career in. And it was during that time that I was exposed to the Reefs program for the first time. The Reefs program has been around since the late 1980s. It originated in the Gulf of Mexico. And I learned what an important program it was actually from the fishermen that we were working with at the time. They'd be driving our sampling boats to help us collect biota samples and water samples and sediment samples. And while we'd be out there, they'd talk about how they could not wait to go out and go fishing on these oil platforms, which at the time seemed bizarre because here we are, working on this disaster caused by an oil platform. And yet I'm also learning what an important fisheries resource these platforms are for Gulf communities. And that's the first time I learned about the Rigs to Reefs program, whereby offshore oil platforms, when they're no longer used for pumping oil, they are decommissioned and converted into permanent artificial reef structures. And that's when I decided to go to graduate school at Scripps, and I met my business partner, Amber, and I learned that California also has a Rigs to Reefs program, but unlike the Gulf of Mexico, California has reefed exactly 0 of their 27 oil platforms.
There's something really interesting about how, in some ways, your work also parallels Natalie's, where you're taking something that has really been a challenge and you're coming up with an alternative to really be able to inspire good positive change and a different pathway forward through this too. Can you speak a little bit more about how, it's really about kind of like this developing an alternative. And for you in your work, you're developing this alternative decommissioning model, one that is really a win-win for both the offshore industry as well as the environmental aspect. But not all are really primed for this. What are some of the rigs that you think are the most ideal? What is it that you're looking for?
So when it comes to seeking out a good Rigs to Reefs candidate, some of the things that we're looking for are structures that have probably been in the water column for longer periods of time. Over decades, they accumulate more and more marine life to establish those marine communities. We're also looking for platforms that aren't going to negatively impact stakeholders. So they're not in major shipping lanes or in the way of trawling fishermen who might want to utilize those ocean bottoms, and they don't really want a platform the size of the Empire State Building, walking access to their trawl grounds. Looking at platforms in terms of where they're located. So an oil platform that's located, for example, at the mouth of the Mississippi River is going to get a lot of impacts from erosion, pollution, and runoff versus a platform that's more in a blue ocean setting away from nearshore erosion issues. You're going to see a much healthier marine ecosystem. So to your point, not every platform is a good candidate for Rigs to Reefs. It really does take a case-by-case examination of these structures to identify which might be best suited for a reefing project.
It's a funny thing, note aside entirely, when I was a little girl growing up in California, I used to always see these offshore oil rigs and the platforms that were off the coast of San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara area. And as a little girl, I used to always tell my dad, oh my God, they're mermaid castles. And now understanding what was really going on there, and that in this transference of decommissioning and really making sure that you're saving costs, but also making sure that ecosystem that has come to be supported around that offshore rig, you really are actually making my own little childhood dream come true in that way. But it's something that can really be scaled out and replicated in so many other industries. So it's incredible. Amber, I want to make sure that I'm coming to you in this as well, because you and Emily both in what you're doing has really come up with such an impactful approach. From your side, I'm curious to dig in a little bit deeper in terms of what that sort of union and the intersection is between the economic, the social, and the ecological implications of doing these different decommissioning projects are. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like I have a similar story to yours, Brandy, about seeing these platforms from my beach chair growing up in Southern California. I always thought that they were some sort of menacing giant out there on the horizon. And I think most people, unless you are a diver or a fisherman, that's what you think. You just think oil and gas, you think industry structure. It's very hard to realize that below the surface, there could be so much life. And in California specifically, our platforms are some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. So they've been studied for over 30 years, primarily out of UC Santa Barbara. And their findings have shown that these structures can be incredibly valuable if properly decommissioned as artificial reefs. And so that sort of speaks to the environmental benefits. Then we look at the economics. And in most cases, decommissioning can be an exorbitantly expensive process. And oil companies bear that financial burden. And when they first drill the well, they know that they have to remove that structure at the end of life. But reefing a structure provides a lot of cost savings. So now they're incentivized to learn more about rigs to reef because they have this financial incentive. But the way that the laws have been structured in the US is that about like 50%, in California, it's 80% of any cost savings goes back to the state into an endowment for marine preservation and conservation, helps fund things like the Department of Fish and Wildlife and ocean conservation initiatives throughout the state. And in California, if 23 of our 27 platforms were to be reefed, and those 23 are the really viable ones, kind of speaking to what Emily mentioned about not every platform is a good candidate, but we can estimate about 23 of our 27 would be good candidates. There would be over $1 billion in saved costs. And the oil companies have to share that with the state. So imagine 80% of that, so 800 million would come back to the state into that endowment for marine preservation and conservation. And the oil companies will maintain liability for the oil wells. So should there ever be a leak or spill or anything like that, they're always responsible for the remediation of that. However, the platform jacket, that's where all the marine life has been developing on. That usually goes back to the state, typically in the Gulf of Mexico regions, and they manage it like they would any other artificial reef. So along with those funds also comes the responsibility of managing that liability. However, in California, that liability isn't really written out very clearly in our legislative system. So that's been one of the issues with why we haven't reefed here in California, because they have the environmental backing, they have the financial incentives, but there's some legislative hurdles that's really preventing it from becoming a reality here. And so rigs to reefs can be a very exciting, but it is a very nuanced and complicated issue, and something that we really enjoy working on.
I mean, I got to go back to how significant of an amount of funding this is and what that could actually do in terms of really incentivizing good policy changes for making sure that we're really driving that adaptive stewardship. Something that also goes alongside with what Natalie's work is how can we really make sure that by bringing in all of these different stakeholders, some which are seemingly on opposite sides of the spectrum, but really being proactive in creating effective policy changes that works for everybody, could be monumental for everything that we're facing in terms of climate change and really the transference of a lot of these industries. So I think one other thing I want to bring up is that you are not alone in this, and that you also are paired along with Dr. Jessica Sandoval, known as Dr. ROV, somebody that's also really taking technology and applying it into their field and really advancing what can happen with exploration. Jessica, I know that I want to know a little bit more about what it is that you have discovered in your work of doing deep sea exploration, and how you're really seeing some of these boundaries that you're pushing in operating a 15-ton crane to make sure that you're launching and pulling up the vehicles that you're working with, but really working at that intersection of robotics and materials engineering. Tell me a little bit more about how this inclusivity looks to be able to really drive some of the change in your field.
Oh, thank you for the introduction there, Brandy. So just as a little bit of background, I work as a remotely operated vehicles pilot. So these are ROVs, as I'll abbreviate. And these are just robots that we use to do subsea inspections, exploration. And yeah, so it's a highly involved process that involves a lot of also engineering, beforehand, because you're dealing with really high pressures at the deep ocean depths. And yeah, what we see on the seafloor is incredible, as everyone here has experience with. You see incredible amount of diversity. As you go to 3,000 meters, you see incredible biodiversity. Archaeological artifacts of interest as well. You see hydrothermal vents. It's certainly like exploring another planet in a certain way, even though it's on our own planet, right? It's just a whole other world that if we don't have eyes on, then we probably wouldn't imagine is there. So that's a big component of exploration, especially for so deep, is that it's all interconnected. But until we really understand and tease out that interconnectivity, the way it might not be protected very well, right? We might lose those resources that are down there. We might lose the biodiversity if we don't know it's there first and protect it. And so that's kind of what we see down there. But when it comes to material science, my background, my PhD is in materials science and engineering. It's really looking to develop the next wave of technology that we can use to explore these very deep depths. So not just the pressure, but also just all the other environmental conditions, the salinity, et cetera, putties laying down there for years at a time if we're installing instrumentation nodes. There's a lot that goes into this from an engineering lens. And one other thing I would say too is that the barrier, and getting to what everyone else is talking about as well, the barrier to deep ocean exploration is very high, right? There's a large financial barrier, a large technological barrier that most communities don't have access to, quite frankly. So it's one thing for me to go out to the middle of the ocean and wherever we are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, whatnot, and have access there is certainly a beautiful thing. But I'm also working with the Ocean Discovery League to help develop low-cost deep sea sensors and systems as well. So taking what I know from the field, doing what I love out at sea with ROVs, then taking that technology and taking that knowledge and trying to bring it to communities that don't have that access. So hoping to broaden the field. When I'm on land, that's my land life, and when I'm out at sea, I do a lot of the deep sea piloting.
I definitely want to touch a little more, because I feel like each one of you are not only really driving advancements within your own field, but you're making sure, like you said, that you're extending that out beyond just your silo of your professional work, but making sure that you're really involving others and inspiring the next generation up as well. I mean, Jessica, you may be the perfect example of this with your undergrad from MIT, master's and PhD from UC San Diego, and a postdoc from Harvard. You're not only driving that field forward for women and for Latino women in particular too, but you're also actively working to inspire kids and youth through science and through technology. Tell me a little bit more about what it is that you're doing to really make sure that you're forging that path forward.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. So in addition to my work, I love writing poetry and writing children's books and illustrations for children, drawing illustrations for children's books, because it's such an inaccessible world in a way, going so deep and seeing all these things. It really inspires your imagination to, write some quirky story, but hopefully also capture the imagination and the interest of a kid, especially that wouldn't have exposure to this world otherwise, and then hopefully kicking off some little spark in their minds that they can, access these hidden worlds, and hopefully get them to explore their own ocean one day. So that's a big component, though, right? Is outreach as well, communicating these stories that we see so far deep, and hopefully inspiring the next generations of students to get interested.
Amber, I know you're itching at the plate to be able to jump in on this too, with your work in terms of advancing STEM careers. Please tell us a little bit about what it is that you're working on.
Absolutely. Yes. So we really enjoy working with young women who are interested in science, technology, engineering, and math, and using ROVs, like Jessica said, as an excellent tool for exploration and really engagement. What we find is that so many young girls never have access to this type of technology, and some don't have access to the ocean at all, or the ability to swim or anything like that. So what we're doing is trying to use this technology as a way to empower them in ocean related careers and give them an outlet and show them the variety of possibilities that are out there. And really, our adventures and sort of finding into ROVs didn't really come around until COVID, when we were sort of constrained on the type of research we could do. We couldn't go out on the typical research vessels with a big crew of people. We had to find new ways to explore the oceans. And that's when we started to really look into the world of personal ROVs and are using ROVs for science. And it's really opened up an exciting new door for us. So it's a privilege to be able to share that with other young women as well.
I'm imagining you both as just having this giant manipulator come through and being able to really change the direction of the future path, especially for women and young girls everywhere, but for everybody inclusively as well. And Natalie, I know in your work, you've also done a lot in terms of inclusivity and making sure that there's educational outreach programs as a part of your work too. Would you like to speak a little bit more towards that?
Well, something Amber said really triggered a memory for me, and that is a specific story. Is we had a summer camp that we were running for youth across the country, and it was marine science camp. And we came prepared with all of our marine science education materials and a whole week planned. And we get there and you realize that when you listen to the needs and you really listen to the community and the people, that the children don't know how to swim. So how are they supposed to learn about marine science and learn to care for something when they don't have that connection with it? So we scratched the whole week was scratched, agenda out the window, and it was turned into a swim camp. And I think it's those stories, like Amber said, and really getting on the ground, listening to the needs, seeing the needs, just like Emily when she was out on the boat with that fisherman, and hearing from the fisherman directly, her being there and hearing that is kind of the spark that you realize this is the solution or this is the need. So that's just an example of that education component. Sometimes what you go in thinking you need to educate on is you actually need to educate on something else. And in that case was swimming, just as an example.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. I mean, Emily, certainly you can really spearhead this too, and I want you to make sure that you're diving in with this. Looking at the common threads, again, of this positive, innovative disturbance that's happening with each of your work. What is it that you are really seeing happen as an evolution within the field of exploration and technology, and particularly within ocean science?
Well, I think what Amber and myself have really started to see is, really innovative approaches to some of the realities of ocean development. It's not really realistic to assume that we won't use our oceans. We use them for transportation, we use them for food, we use them for energy development. So it's not really a question of how can we stop using our oceans. The question has become, how can we use them in a way that's more sustainable? And how can we use them in a way that's more of a win-win solution for both sides? And so what we've started to see, and I really believe a lot of it originated within the Fisheries program, but we're starting to see that same concept of how can we build structures that serve more than a purpose of energy production? So with wind turbines, we're starting to see wind farms pop up that also have aquaculture hubs associated with them, producing tons and tons of seaweed while also producing sustainable energy. So I think what I've started to notice within the ocean sciences is this duality, this approach to recognizing the reality of our need for these oceans, but also recognizing how we might be able to build structures more effectively with less of a negative impact.
That's exactly it. And I think there's something so powerful and impactful about it. Doesn't have to be either or, but it's really a yes and. And when we look at climate change in particular and this period of time that we're in right now, there's such an opportunity to not, in my view, worry so much about a black and white transfer of like, we can't have this, we only have to have this, but how can we really make sure that we're maximizing the impact that we can have by looking at that duality of things? In my own work in the agricultural field, it's not agriculture without technology. but it's how can technology be able to amplify nature-based solutions at the same time, which is something that really works with each of your work too, and listening to communities on the ground and really figuring out what it is that they need. If each of you could really learn something from each other that may be able to propel your work forward more, what would that be? Just in this short discussion, I know it's a big question to ask.
I can definitely, I want to start us off there because I actually wrote this down from what Natalie was talking about needing to hear the authentic voice of those you're impacting. I feel like it's such a great reminder that I needed to hear, because so often I get siloed into my own work and my own headspace, and I forget that the impact that we're making has, and I want it to have a much larger range and larger reach, and to go out and get on the ground and have those authentic conversations. And now more than ever, given the ability to do so using technology, we can reach people from across the world, while also having the ability to go out and meet with somebody in person, which also has its own strengths. So I just really, I'm leaving this conversation with sort of feeling re-empowered to go out and make sure that those authentic voices are heard.
I mean, I was really struck by Jessica's work in terms of being a commercial ROV pilot and the work that you're doing in the super deep sea. You know, that's a space that we work in a lot, but we've never, in all of our decommissioning projects and platform projects, worked with a female ROV operator. And that's unfortunate, because that doesn't need to be that way. And I think often it's because young girls aren't introduced to careers like that, or perhaps they're not meeting women like Jessica that are doing this. And I was really struck by that when you were talking. I was just thinking to myself, oh, we've never worked with a female operator, and we've done hundreds of projects around the world. And that's something I'd really like to see change, and something that I absolutely think will change, especially with the work that Jessica's doing.
That's a great point, is that there isn't a lot of females in this space right now, even in ocean technology. And that's one thing that it's wonderful being a part of this panel right now, because they're all wonderfully empowered female voices here. And hopefully that's one thing that we will see change in the future, right? Is seeing more women out in the field, in their communities, and also in these engineering technology roles is one thing that I would really love to see in the future. Because, you know, I can only count a handful of female pilots on my hand, you know, of this whole industry that people that I know of contacts in this field. So thanks for making that point, because it's one thing that would be lovely to see changed.
I think, you know, hearing the numbers that Amber said, you know, showing those values out, with my background also in economics, I think it just re-solidifies for me as well, is sometimes your stakeholder is your government, or is your state, or is that private entity, and their need is to ensure their bottom lines and their success of their business or their state or their economy. So I think that drove home for me. Also reminder, or which I always strive to do in our work, is putting that economic value on the work that you're doing. And I think that the example with the rigs to reef is a brilliant one of really being able to also put that number on there. And I think it's very difficult sometimes to do that in the conservation world, to really show that figure. So it's just a reminder for me of the importance of that and what we do.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something really, really important about how each of your impactful work is really also not looking at things through this very siloed approach. You're working within the overarching system, the social dynamics, the environmental dynamics, the economic dynamics, and making sure that you're leveraging that economic impact to really be able to extend something that is going to be lasting and sustainable. And again, it can't be unstated and uncelebrated how important it is to have each one of us be women in this conversation, and that you're really those pathfinders moving forward. And I hope with women being outnumbered in STEM 2 to 1, that ultimately this in the future is not a remarkable incident, that this is our only EC50 conversation with all women explorers. So each one of you are absolutely dynamic and powerful in your own right as humans, but it is really worth noting what you're doing to advance women in the field as well. And there's something too about, another thing that I wrote down from this was not only this trend, Natalie, that you said in working in local communities, but also really looking at the intersectionality that can be possible through working with different stakeholders and how that can parallel other industries, even outside of the ones you're working in. And also seeing how disaster or damage can really catalyze innovation and can catalyze change. And it doesn't just have to be stopped as having it be a disaster, but instead an opportunity to really be able to approach things differently and do things better too. So again, in the true sort of statement and definition of a wave, this is the disturbance that travels in all directions without necessarily changing what that medium is, but really reframing what can happen moving forward. So I want to thank each one of you for your absolutely incredible work. Jessica, you're like a superhero out there on the water, and we want to make sure that every single young girl growing up, regardless of where they are, knows about your work. Amber, Emily, leading the way with your incredible groundbreaking work with Blue Latitudes, and really making sure that as a woman-owned company, you're really looking at how things can be done through a different stakeholder approach. And Natalie, can you please just make sure that you're leading all of our governmental policy moving forward so that everyone's included and feels heard and is a part of the conversation. So thank you all so much for joining us for this EC50 Wavemakers. Please make sure that you're following each one of these incredible women and their journeys, because they're absolutely just getting started. So we're going to see a lot more coming from them moving forward. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to following your work too.